Hello everyone, in this video we will learn about the hook mate. This checkmate pattern demonstrates the optimal coordination between the knight and rook. We have already studied the Arabian mate where knight and rook team up together nicely to checkmate the king that is trapped in the corner. But the hook's mate can occur at the corner as well as in the middle of the board. So let us study about this pattern. In this position, white can checkmate the black king with the help of rook to f7. And the reason this checkmate pattern is named as hookmate because the knight and rook gives the visual appearance of hook. That is why it is named as hookmate. So three things are important this checkmate. The knight that guards the rook that is checking the king, and the knight is also guarded by one of white pieces. So these three things are important. The knight, the rook and a piece protecting the knight. And the other squares are usually covered by the enemy pawns or pieces, or they can be covered sometimes by white pieces as well. So let us study some examples of this checkmate pattern. So this is the game of Vasily Ivanchuk playing with the white pieces, and let us jump to this position. So Ivanchuk's last move was pawn to a6, and here black thought that he had all the squares under control and he can take this pawn on c4. So black took the pawn on c4. But here Ivanchuk had a nice idea. He played the move rook to g7. Even though this square is covered by the bishop, he had seen a checkmate here. After the move rook to g7, the king has no moves. Once again you can see these knights are protecting each other, and also the knight on h4 is guarded with the pawn on g3. So these knights are protected, and after rook to g7, the king cannot go here because the knight is covering the h6 square. So this rook has to be taken, and after bishop takes g7, rook takes g7. Once again the king has no squares, so black has to play the move rook to g6, and after rook to g6, we once again have a hook mate here where this knight is guarding this rook, and these escape squares are covered by the white's rook, and the f4 square is covered by the white pawn. Hence it is another example of hook's mate where knight on h4 is covering the rook on g6, while the knight on h4 is covered both by the knight as well as the pawn. So now let's move on to the next example. Now this is the game of Judith Polgar playing with the black pieces, and let us jump to this position. So black's last move was rook to b1 check, and after king to f2, here she finished off her opponent with a very nice combination. Now once again you can see that there is a possibility of hook's mate. We have the knight that can guard the rook. Also the knight is guarded by one of the black pawns, but the king has the e3 square where it can escape. So she finishes off her opponent here with the move bishop to d4 check. Now the king has no moves, and now white has to put one of his pieces on the e3 square, either the bishop or the rook. But after rook e3 or bishop e3, now the king cannot go to e3 since it is blocked by one of white pieces, and now we can play the move rook to f1 check, and it is actually checkmate. Another example of hook's mate where the knight is guarding the rook that is checking the king, and also the knight is guarded by one of the black pieces. So it is another example of hook's mate where with a little move bishop to d4 check, she blocked one of the escape squares of the king, and then rook to f1 was checkmate. So now I have a test position. Now let's jump to this position. So white's last move was king to h2, and it is black to play and win in this position. Pause the video and think. Black to play and win. So you can see black is a queen down in this position, but he has a very nice combination here to finish off white. Once again we have the knight that is guarded by the black rook, and if we could transport this rook on f8 to the h1 square, then it would be checkmate because of the hook's mate pattern once again. But to force that, black has this move bishop to g1 check, a very nice move that forces king to recapture this bishop because the king cannot take the knight since it is guarded, and as well it cannot go to h1 square because knight is guarding the h1 square. So white king has to take this bishop, and then we have rook to f1 check forcing king h2, and now the rook gets to the h1 square, and once again it is a hook mate. So this is all that you need to know about the hook mate. Thank you.